Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Looking for a pickup truck to get just about anything done? Look no further. The Chevy Silverado EV isn't just the most powerful Silverado ever, with next-level towing capability and technology. It also offers game-changing versatility with the available multi-flex midgate and tailgate, which means Silverado EV helps you carry large, bulky, and oddly shaped items up to nearly 11 feet in length. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive. Visit Chevrolet.com to learn more.
Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, our big old history of the Champions League here on Heart and Hand. I am Martin Ramsey, your host. And last week we discussed the old European Cup, why it had to change, and that trial season of group stages in 91-92. Now we're ready to start the history proper. 92-93, a special season for listeners on this network, I am sure. And I'm joined by the man whose idea the show was, Mr. Adam Thornton. Adamski.
Hi, Martin.
And ably assisted by the man who lived through it all, David Edgar.
Yeah. God, yeah, I've lived through every Champions League season and I can remember them. I'm old enough. I got a bit freaked out last week when Adam was saying the first one he remembered was Ajax, and I thought, I watched that in the pub. So, yeah. But, yes, nice to be back.
Okay, so the way this is going to work, you're going to get 2 episodes per Champions League season, one kind of led by me around games and moments and the kind of impact and the story they perhaps tell, and then another led by Adam, how things happened tactically and how those star players were used. So I'm going to kick things off with the second round of the European Cup, the round before the Champions League, and a little known tie, which we've not really spoken about much on this website, which was nicknamed the Battle of Britain. Now, I appreciate, listeners, when it comes to Rangers and the Champions League, there could be a fair bit of duplication. I'll try and limit that. There is in-depth discussion of these games on Dominant, Time Capsule, Advocat Years, Ekira, etc., etc. But the reason I wanted to look at Rangers Leeds was because of what it tells us about where British clubs were with respect to European elite football at that particular time in terms of style. If I can crowbar one other game in, the Leeds 4, Stuttgart 1 from the first round, second leg. Leeds were in trouble, 3-0 down in Germany, and it was this old up and at them, they won't like it up them, we'll fight them on the beaches type of night. ITV kind of, certainly with Alan Parry and Ron Atkinson in the studio and in the commentary position, were very much selling it in that way. Leeds went ahead and then just lost a sloppy, soft goal, which kind of seemed to kill the tie. Leeds got a penalty before half-time. And then 2 goals in not a short or not a long period of time brought them right back in at 4-1, only away goals, but they still had 20-odd minutes left. And they huffed and puffed, and it was the Germans really who looked more dangerous. They put on a substitute very late on to shore things up, and that substitute was the 4th foreign player that they'd used in the game. And eventually someone realised you're not allowed to do that. And of course, all hell broke loose. Now, what UEFA should have done, of course, was just say, well, you've broken the rules, Stuttgart, you're gone. But it was an English club, and that relationship wasn't quite as it should have been. And they, of course, had to play that one-off trial game in the Nou Camp, which Leeds won and, of course, went through to play Rangers. Adam, The two games are very famous. There's a lot of huff and puff. It's like a very British derby. It's funny listening to Alan Parry and commentary in that Stuttgart game, decrying the cynicism of those kind of talking down and criticising the English game, as John Lukic says, yet another aerial bombardment from miles away. This artillery fire. Gorham and Lukic loved a bit of that. Tackles went flying in. The two goals that Rangers scored at Ibrox were penalty box nonsense. It was scrappy as all hell. But you still had McAllister's goal, you still had Hateley's goal, you still certainly had McCoy's goal, and McAllister and Strachan and Speed and Cantona and Durant, footballers now and again that were allowed to kind of break out. But this up and at 'em, huff and puff, there's going to be a theme of the few episodes, I guess, up until 1999, where it would become predominantly English clubs, but this clash of styles was going to become kind of apparent.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. I think watching it back, it is quite rudimentary. We'll come on to, I guess, talking about the back pass rule and whether originally that potentially made it more Route 1 than it would go on to be with that sort of evolution that came later. But at the start, I think absolutely it was a big change, and naturally goalkeepers and defenders got a little bit fearful and would just launch the ball. But we'll come on to dig into that in a bit more detail. But yeah, I think you're right. They had some really, really good players. Strachan, McAllister. I always remember the goal that McAllister scored at Ibrox, watching it back on. I don't even know what that would have been. VHS, but I used to watch it so many times when I was younger, that just the silence. And I think it's the same in the away end as well, the away game as well, because obviously it's all been built up that it's Scottish champions are coming down and the English are going to do them over, and just that Hateley goal goes in, and even though you're watching it on video and it's like 10, 15 years later, you're watching it, you've seen it a million times, just there's that sort of turning around to go, is that actually a goal? Did we do that? And I felt that
What's going wrong? How can we?
Yeah, Hateley's one at Elland Road and also McAllister's at Ibrox. It was just those kind of shocks of, oh, that happened. So yeah, it was a great. I mean, it was Battle of Britain is absolutely right. It was pulsating. It was end to end. We did see a few mistakes, a few high balls that you mentioned, but yeah, you've called it right. Two or three brilliant goals. Absolutely.
Dave, it's not called the Battle of Britain for nothing, was it? It was, again, they knew what they were talking about. They knew what this kind of game would be. I can't imagine if the Spanish champions had met the French champions or whatever else at various points, that they would be basically describing the game as a war before it even started.
No, I think that is unlikely. What I think was very noticeable, Martin, about these two sides was the lack of pace. And pace would do for British teams so often in European competition, staggeringly so. And you actually see it harnessed, I think, properly, really, for the first time by Manchester United, who had, of course, remember they had Giggs in one wing and either Kanchelskis or Sharp on the other. And could be breathtaking. And I wonder if it goes back to this sense of honour and counter it. We don't do counter-attacking. That's a bit sneaky. That's Italian, where you just sit in and try and soak up pressure and then go and hit on the break. I don't know, but I was looking at this side, and you're right about those midfields. There are talented footballers in there, but there isn't. In most sides, you'd expect one sort of flying winger type, one player who could really move at pace, and there isn't in either of these sides. What they both had was a big talismanic striker up front that they would play off. Leeds had won the league with Lee Chapman doing that, of course. And what both sides did was very quickly get the ball up and try and play off. In Mark Hateley, you had somebody who, let's be honest, this whole campaign, no team can really handle. And that's the thing about, you can call it agricultural, but if you do it well and you have someone who can do it, then why wouldn't you? Because certainly European sides didn't face up to that sort of challenge. I think that it's so interesting that first round game you mentioned there, the away goal. And again, the amount of British teams who tripped up on that over the years is absolutely staggering to me, because you mentioned that they are sloppy. And I think it's because there was a mentality to just play every game as it was rather than look at it as a two-legged tie. So it's almost we'll beat them. Well, it doesn't matter if you beat them now, because
And they've got that
goal.
goal, right? They got that goal just before 20 minutes. And Leeds, Ellen Road was still being developed. And anyone who watched English football, go back and look at those mid-90s years, try to catch themselves getting into the up to date with Taylor Report. So much groundwork being done to put the season in. But there was still a fervent crowd, and it was still big. They get that goal back, and it's almost like, right, well, they've only got 2 to get, and then they're back level. They'll get another one maybe late on the game, maybe in extra time. This is kind of done. It's almost like they didn't expect the Germans to bother trying to attack, and the boy just walks it in. Everyone's kind of standing off. It's incredible. Adam, David's point about pace, I think, is absolutely fair. Maybe with the exception of the very appropriately named Gary Speed, but they're not. These are not quick teams, especially at the back. Dave McPherson as a fullback is not. I was going to say he's not James Tavernier. I'm looking at Gary Stevens. It is not exactly what you're kind of looking at. And when Rangers do counter attack, in that fantastic goal, still ranking up there with the best we've ever scored. There's they can't cope. That's slumberly, kind of turgid defence is. We're going to see it time and again by the Scottish and English champions quite a fair bit.
Yeah, I think so. And although it's a very quick counter attack, it's quick in terms of the excellent passing and the movement. It's not Mark Haley running the length of the park and throwing the ball into McCoist. It is, I guess, creative and that taking advantage of that space, and probably taking advantage of Leeds' hubris a little bit as well, pushing on, like you said, just up and at them, and just a really well worked goal. But yeah, you're right. I think David called it spot on. Even when we're talking about some of the games that we're going to come on and talk to, you had players who were intelligent and who were quick with a touch, but there's not a lot of searing pace at all, really, in this stage. I'm not sure, just maybe because I'm biased with watching so much Serie A at that point, where it was all sort of technical and defensive, and you're trying to break teams down with manipulation of space rather than that sort of English 1999 Man United type swashbuckling attacking play that we'll come on to. But yeah, 100% of this time it's still all about physicality, having a big man and a little man, as David likes to tell us up front, and 2 wingers, sure, wider players, absolutely, that are able to cut inside and get on the ball and make things happen in those spaces. So yeah, I would say that's pretty spot on. But yeah, take nothing away from, like I said, the 3 goals I think that were scored that for me were great within this. Yeah,
Davey, everything that's mentioned about this game, we can't do it justice without talking about the English media and those assumptions, and of course Walter Smith used that to perfection again in that Stuttgart game. Leeds have been magnificent tonight. They're crumbling. They just need that extra push. There's just this absolute level of just assumed knowledge, as if we were still in 1984. As if English football hadn't dropped a stitch in that time, and you've got Ian St John in the build up to the Ellen Road game saying, well, let's hope Leeds can do it, and just assuming that 2-1's not enough at Ibrox for Rangers. They needed maybe a 2-goal lead, etc. It's as if this banishment just never took place.
Well, for them it didn't, because time stood still. We talk, I think, a lot now about the English media who don't really follow football out with their own country. Not wholly anymore, and certainly I would argue now they've got a better case for saying at least their league is the best in the world. But they didn't know anything about Serie A. They didn't know anything about Spain. As far as they were concerned, it was still 1984. They had grown up with English teams dominating in Europe, and you have to say that was the case, because it was. And they did just expect to pick up where everything had left off. And there is a complete lack of knowledge. I used to notice it a lot, Martin, in the coverage, ITV, you mentioned there, in the 90s. If it was a team they'd heard of, then they would maybe get a modicum of respect. And by that, I always call it the Valencia and Villarreal assumption. If they were playing Valencia could be 18th in La Liga at the time and playing badly, but they'd heard of Valencia. Villarreal, they'd never heard of, so they got no respect. They could be second. And I think you're right. I think they were frozen in time. And when they came out of this stasis, I think there is a degree of shock for a few seasons in the early 90s, and it's hard to mention to younger listeners, or hard to get over to younger listeners, just quite how disorientating this was for fans of English football, that they had been so used to having a real good chance of winning pretty much any European competition they were in. Because, as well as that European Cup success, Martin, you had Everton in the Cup Winners' Cup, you had Forest reached a UEFA Cup final, Spurs won a UEFA Cup. They could compete, but then they've come out and football has changed. Football has changed post 1990, post that World Cup, and teams are playing in a completely different way, and they're playing in a way that the English point blank refuse to even try and understand. And at times, I think we've got to count ourselves in that. You're getting the embryonic ideas. Adam mentioned it, that you're getting embryonic ideas about pressing and space, and you can be dangerous when you don't have the ball. These concepts were so completely alien to the UK, where it was, you get the ball, you get it forward as quick as you can, and then they'll have a go at scoring against you, and you try and defend it. And it sounds really, really simplistic, but it was. And then when we started to come up against sides who would do different things and change things, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but we all know what kind of coaching went on in the UK at that time. And a lot of it was about personality, wasn't it? About whether you had the personality of your players. Because the most innovative tactic you would maybe get during a game from a manager would be to swap the wide players. Right, it's not working, you have a go over there. And apart from that, you didn't see formation changes in game, you didn't see tactical alterations. The game now is so much more elaborate. There's so much more to it. You need to do so many different things. We talk about it off the ball work now, that the very top players back then, watch these games, folks, strikers do not come back behind the halfway line ever, right? It's not their job. They are allowed to stand and wait till the game comes back up their end. These days, you would never, ever get away with that at this level.
Thank you, Adam. We're going to stay for the second game in that second round phase. The holders that we spoke about last week, Barcelona, pitched up against Spartak Moscow. They go to Moscow, draw 1-1, one down. Your boy Cheeky Begiristain gets that equaliser. Back to the Camp Nou, 2 up pretty early on, 2 first half goals, all looking cosy. Sisca get a goal back just before half time. Bit annoying that I guess that away goal back, but Barcelona still have the goal lead. You would expect them to go and get 1 or 2 more. Instead, in the space of 4 minutes, Sisca get the 2 goals. They end up winning 3-2, sensationally knocking Barcelona out of the tournament. Then and since, that kind of Cruyffian way, and we'll speak about it a little bit, I guess, in the 1994 final, and it's been labelled at Pep as well, especially as early forays, we'll say, with Bayern Munich in the Champions League. Games just disappearing, disintegrating very quickly. When Manchester City going to Anfield, I'm sure lost 3 goals in jig time. The theory would be that the more purist teams, maybe less pragmatic, that when things start to go wrong, they, for want of a better phrase, don't have that plan B, aren't able just to shut down, just play differently for 10 minutes, and they're looking to the great creator, the great leader, for help. He can't play. And maybe they're not empowered to find other solutions. That would be the kind of simplistic look, but the way that they get some of these kind of mini collapses, cluster goals that take ties away. I've always wanted your your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think cluster goals is right. We've seen it with Barcelona against PSG as well. It's not necessarily a I was going to say it's not necessarily a Guardiola thing. It's a Barcelona thing, I think, or a Cruyff thing. I think it goes a lot deeper than that. Again, you mentioned the '94 final that's going to come up when it's not your day, or when someone is better than you at something and you aren't able to adapt. I do find it quite interesting because total football is all about manipulation of space and no set positions, and everyone is free and fluid to do what they want to do within this sort of framework. But yeah, and it's now, what we're talking now, 50 years on, and there is still this brittleness, I think, about it. I think for me, I think it's arrogance. I think it's we speak about it enough in here in terms of pragmatism versus ideological beliefs, and I think it is that. It's why should I do that, or let an opposition do that, and we'll simply double down and we'll get back and we'll do what we need to do, and then another goal goes in, and it then just becomes, we've all seen Rangers in those games, it becomes, you let it become a basketball game, and weirdly enough, if you're Barcelona, probably have less of the ball because you're trying so frantically to get up there and get going, and opposition can just pick you apart, as we see in this game. So I think in this one, I think it was absolutely arrogance that they went to 2-0 up and they were like, okay, we're kind of done here. They're not going to come back, and then we see that one goal comes in, and then there's that brittleness that I mentioned, where maybe actually something might happen here. A goal before half time is always a bad one because you're then dwelling on it for the full half time, and then another couple of goals right after the break. They still have half an hour after, when is it 62 minutes, the third goal goes in, so there's still a half an hour there. But again, as we've seen too often with Rangers, sometimes when it's not your day and the damage has been done early, you do feel like you're just playing out time. And I think that was the case here. But it is a big shock. But you can't say when you see how they got on the year after. I guess certainly in the way that team starts to wind down, and I guess the philosophy starts to wind down for 10, 15 years until Guardiola revives it. You can certainly see why, particularly with, as David mentioned, the rise of pressing and people being a bit more tactically adept and counter-attacking and all that sort of stuff. But it's definitely a little bit of that, shoots of that are happening here.
Blinds.com's Black Friday sales event is happening now with our best deals of the season. Let our design experts help you make the perfect selection for your home on your schedule. We can send free samples right to you and handle everything from measure to install. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 50% site-wide, plus doorbusters, and a free professional measure at the Blinds.com Black Friday sales event now. Rules and restrictions may apply.
This year, Santa's bringing the power of Energizer into his workshop.
Whoa, the Energizer Bunny's got so much power.
Wait, he's powered up all the toys. I think that means we're done for the year.
I love this bunny.
He's the hardest working helper the North Pole has ever seen. And he wants all your gifts to have the power of the #1 longest lasting AA battery. So this holiday season, stock up on Santa's and the elves' favorite battery, Energizer Ultimate Lithium.
This episode is brought to you by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. There's plenty to be thankful for. Your friends, family, and the fact that you can now get NFL Sunday Ticket for only $89. So thank yourself this holiday season and watch every game every Sunday when you bundle NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV. Sign up now at youtube.com/Sunday Ticket. Offer ends December 2nd. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games. Terms and embargoes apply.
We spoke last week, Martin, about the mystery that you could sometimes get in the 70s and 80s when you're playing aside from behind the Iron Curtain. It's slightly different here in the early 90s because there is an acceptance that a lot of the superstar players have moved on from these countries post 1990. But that meant that there were groups of young players coming through that teams weren't quite aware of yet. And I think that Siska were an excellent example of that surprise package. They didn't have as many of the names that we would know from a World Cup or whatever. But also with Barcelona, I think there was an arrogance. They were the champions. Johan Cruyff was not a man lacking in confidence in his ideas. I think it's fair to say. And I agree with Adam's assessment of that match. I think that there was a sense that, look, we're not going to lose to this lot. They're not going to knock us out. And then a little bit of panic, I think, set in towards the end when they realised, oh, holy shit, they might. So it felt seismic. It was seismic because I think most people had felt that we were on for a Barcelona AC Milan final if the draw kept them apart.
And that's the thing. I mean, yet again, before we even get to this group stage, it's supposed to protect and everything else. We've lost a massive name. The holders are out. I guess even the architects of the new world would say, well, they haven't gone out to AC Milan in that second round. It's been a cup shot. You get them. That's their own fault. It's not as if we've lost one by planning. There was seeding in the first round by this point. Things are starting to get in place to try and ensure. I mean, look at all the big countries are kept apart. England's the kind of standout, but England was not, in terms of coefficient, up there because they'd lost so many years in exile. So Barcelona gone, and the Champions League starts proper, as we know, in the pouring rain at Ibrox. I will pick that first game against Marseille 2-2. Davey again, and if people want to run down the details of this game, they can find it many places on this website. I guess why I wanted to pick this one out was James Dixon's book, excellent book, The Fix, on this season, but again, what the Champions League brought to football, really. He came on to speak about it, and now he is a football fan, rugby fan, sports fan from the south of England, and has no connection with Scottish football, with Rangers or Celtic or anything else. Similar ages to me. And there's a couple of things here. This is on telly, live on telly. Now, unless a British team was playing previously, you don't see the final probably until 1991, unless there's British interest. That British interest could extend to the fact that Terry Venables managed Barcelona in 86 and they put it on. But those great Milan victories, 89-90, I had to see on Sports Night, the highlights, the goals.
Right.
You
Midweek
sit
Sports
down and
Special.
watch that. Never mind every round of the competition. This is new. This is getting used to. You're seeing the elite, and the highlights after it would be extensive of all the other group games and match day 1, 2, 3, whatever. And this 12, 13-year-old boy from the south of England, transfixed by the drama, by the momentum swings, by this squad that oozed talent, to a Rangers squad that David Odds re-registered, reserve team coach, put on the bench because we had no substitutes, just fighting in the pissing rain to come back and grab 2-2. Marseille could have easily snatched a third. Rangers could have snatched a third. It was brilliant fun, which is what the casual viewer, Davey, after Italian 90 and the doors that opened, that's what they're after. And now they're going to get it every couple of weeks. And that's really what this changed.
Yeah, it looked different too, didn't it, with the branding, which was a sort of new thing. And Ibrox at that time was the best stadium in the UK. There are changes happening with the Taylor report. But it was a shite pitch throughout the 90s. You remember that. I remember one time our pitch got a disease. We had a pitch that had the cold. But yeah, it looked different. And it looked great at Ibrox back then, as I say, to a viewer who was used to either the old terracing in England or these half-built stadiums as they were getting at that point, to tune in and see, and packed as well, and the noise and the atmosphere, because it was. And then it's made more exciting. The weather was brutal. You and I were at this game, and it was, the walk, even just, we parked in Bellahouston Park, the walk to the ground, you look like you'd been deep sea diving, and then you're absolutely right, the clash of styles, because you have this astonishingly good French side full of superstars who were so good. They didn't let the pitch bother them. They moved the ball at a frightening pace. Certainly, if it was your team they were playing, they moved the ball at a pace that we struggled very badly with. And Rangers get there by, I know it can be overplayed, but Rangers get there by hanging in, and then that British thing that you couldn't win the tournament with it, but it could be effective if it was channeled correctly in bursts. With Haitley. And then another thing that you mentioned there is Rangers having to chuck on Gary McSweggan because 3 foreigners rule. So on comes this youngster, scores this incredible, amazing header. Ibrox gets rocking. A really good second goal from Mark Haitley. And it was this complete clash of styles, which is sort of what in European football is interesting. It's about the football that's played in different leagues and how it compares to others. That's become less so as football has become more homogenised. I don't think you have completely different styles of playing. I think the styles permeate because we watch a lot more. But back then, each sort of not every individual league, but a lot of almost geographical groupings played football in a certain way. What I don't think you could say is that in terms of long term, what was the most realistic what was the most realistic path to success, what they were doing or what we were doing? It was what they were doing. What we were doing was archaic. What they were doing was the future. And I think that there's a bit of a Venn diagram crossover here, but they were moving away and the crossover was getting smaller and smaller. Yeah. And that's what would happen to us throughout the 90s. It would get worse and worse and worse. This is the sort of last where that British up and at 'em gumption, roaring crowd, physicality could get there. The other thing as well is that during the 90s, you see a stiffening of refereeing. And we'll, of course, come across that in the Bruges game this season, where Mark Haitley sent off for someone you'd be sent off for now and nobody would complain. But back then, there's a genuine sense of shock and outrage because you don't get sent off for that in the UK. And I think as football under certainly Platini's leadership of UEFA, who'd been a very skillful player, it moved towards. It sounds almost crazy that it took to the 90s for this to happen. Of saying, maybe if we don't and of course there'll be a massive thing that happens this season that really speeds that along. But I think that there was this sense of, why are we letting the skillful players, the entertaining players, the players we can market, if you want to take it to that, new buzzword that was kicking about at the time, why are we letting them be kicked off the park? And this is being done with impunity. So that sort of thing again pushed this raw physicality, this unrefined, because physicality is still a wonderful thing to have, by the way, if it's married to technical and pace and all the rest of it. But we didn't have that. And if you looked at the way Marseille played, they played at a speed we couldn't live with. We couldn't live with for 70 minutes. Eventually, they relax a little bit. They're 2-0 up. They think the job's done. And then Rangers managed to dig out an amazing comeback. But I think in terms of what was the sustainable style of football that was going to do well in this brave new world, they already had it. We were clinging to a relic from the past.
Adam, I mean, Gary McSwiggan, if this touches on what we kind of talked about with the lead stuff, Gary McSwiggan changes the game with a goal, but the substitution changes the game because Ian Durrant, who was playing off Mark Haitley, is dropped deeper. It's him that's now spraying passes about and getting Rangers into better areas in that final third, creating better chances, although McSwiggan's header is, I don't know what the XG would be on that, right enough. But that's again in this up and at him and kind of Dunkirk spirit. It's Smith's use of a footballer that actually changes the game. But for all the entertainment, this game set Rangers back quite a wee bit because fans for the best part of the 90s felt that was the template. We're never going to pass the ball like that. We're never going to move the ball. We're never going to be as fit. So it needs spirit. It needs 11 British players. The formal rules shouldn't really apply to us anyway because this is how we do it.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's enough in this game that you could be, I think, forgiven for sort of thinking, oh well, on another day. Horrendous mistake for Voller's goal. And actually, I mean, as I said, I've seen these goals so many times, but it's only maybe when I go back now or with a sort of extended highlights, if you like, of them. Even Boxic's goal, it's a lovely finish as soon as he hits the ball, but if you watch it back, Goff and Brown get dragged to Voller. McPherson is just standing watching him in the box, and he just sort of drifts away from him. So when you're looking back at it in the pub afterward, you think, oh, if one of these things had changed, then who knows? We might have been there. Great header from McSwiggan. You're absolutely spot on. Hateley's is just a wonderful goal. The way that he ghosts in and gets himself down to that level to tuck that header away is fantastic.
So header. Yeah, controls the header from there because he's so low. I mean, it really is a wonderful goal.
The angle was perfect when you see it from the main stand side, because you see him miles back and you think this is going to be a Mark Hateley Aberdeen header, and it really, really isn't. He ghosts all the way to the front post pretty much, and he's, I don't know, 2 foot off the ground when he heads into the net. So yeah, I can kind of see it. Obviously, it's so difficult now to contextualize it, because at that time we were absolutely dominant. Scottish football was easy enough for us there. So you're just thinking, okay, this is fine. I'm sure we'll get our act together at some point in Europe, and we'll do this. We're not that far away. We'll be fine. But yeah, I think as David said, this is certainly the template for me. Again, going back to look at Marseille, it's just a ridiculous team. We'll come on to the style, I guess, and it's almost one of those things that you almost wish that they hadn't been such horrible cheats, because the players that they had, and the way that they played, as David said, some of the players up front, even everywhere really, they were all fantastic players, and it is absolutely tainted, I guess, but it's also the template, I think, for them winning the World Cup. When you look at the sort of style of player there, I know they've got Desailly and they've got Deschamps, and they are literally those players, but when you think of the setup, the roles, the profiles of some of those players, it's, for me, it's the template of what gave them that ridiculous international success a few years later. So yeah, we'll dig into Marseille in more detail later on, but yeah, I could see why it could be a bit of a hard luck story there, and you never know, one more goal, or if the game had went on for 5 more minutes, you might have Hateley have got another goal, all that sort of stuff.
Like Richard Nixon, they didn't need to. They just didn't need to. Okay, for the fourth game, I'm going to go to Group B, which we don't obviously really talk about. We focus on us on this network and everywhere else. Group B was the group of death. AC Milan, of course, won the European Cup 89 and 90. PSV had won it in 88. Porto had won it in 87. And even, I guess, the fourth team, Göteborg, had won the UEFA Cup twice in the last 10 years. This was, other than Marseille, we were happy to avoid. Sadly, we couldn't avoid all 5 of them, but these were the teams that certainly Rangers wanted to avoid. The first game at the San Siro, Milan against Göteborg. Milan won 4-0. Marco van Basten scores all 4 goals. The third is an overhead kick from the edge of the box. He has just turned 28 years old. Those were he's on 21 goals for the season. This is November. He's playing in Serie A. That is quite a lot of goals for that stage of the season for someone who plays in Italy. He is about to be announced as the FIFA World Player of the Year. He's about to pick up the Ballon d'Or for the 3rd time. This man is top of the world. Fabio Capello said he was the best striker he'd ever worked with. It was a sensational performance. Marco van Basten would score 1 more goal in his professional life after this night. He would play Milan played Ancona a few weeks later, and he got a bad injury that day. We'll talk about him being rushed back because he did score a goal at the end of that season. Adam, I'm interested in this. I know we're going to speak about Milan in maybe a wee bit more detail in next week, but this seems to halt something in them. They have the best number 9 in the world. They're actually scoring quite well. I think they scored 65 goals that season, but it's almost like Capello just shuts down after this. They kind of stumble to the title that season after kind of really setting the header alight. This 4-0 is not really replicated in the Champions League. I think they win by 1 goal pretty much every game apart from maybe the last one, which is a dead rubber. The next season they would win Serie A by, I think they scored 36 goals or something ridiculous. So many draws, so many 1-0s. Now there's a couple of outliers in 93-94, which we'll come to in a few weeks, but they changed, and for Milan we'll maybe speak about next week, but what a loss to the footballing world. And if that hadn't happened, Van Basten talks about botched injuries as botched operations, but even 2 or 3 more years get Van Basten into his early 30s. Another that World Cup, that Dutch team that got the quarterfinals in 94, unlucky to be beaten by Brazil. You're talking even just 2 or 3 more seasons in his career. He's talking about best of all time, surely.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And obviously that ankle situation was there for a while. It was mid-80s, wasn't it? I think he'd had surgery and it just never quite healed up, I guess. So that might be something that now, currently, or in 2024, that you might be able to then think, okay, well, we can maybe get something done there. We've got no idea what happened. But yeah, it didn't really impact him. It probably did.
Did he go to Dr. Cruikshank, Martin?
I think he went to the one that Amo went to, yeah.
Right. Sorry, Aaron.
So who knows what might have happened if he had been dealt with properly, even at the time, or even with today's medicine. But I guess it's not really that rare for someone to be finishing their career at that time. We're going to come on and talk about another goal scoring centre forward who was back home when he was 30 and past his peak, really, or wasn't really interested in his peak anymore. So because it's an injury here, I think you feel robbed. You absolutely do. And like you said, he was absolutely fantastic. I mean, these goals, the first goal's actually a great finish, I think, in this game, because he's sort of wrestling in the box and it's almost like he's falling over and he sticks his foot out and it goes in the roof of the net. The overhead kick, I think, at the edge of the box is fantastic. Look at the goalkeeper again. Look at the goalkeeper again, and I'm thinking, but then who's expecting an overhead kick from the edge of the box? So really, it's no one's expecting it. So I don't blame the goalkeeper for going, "What the fuck was that? Like, what happened here?"
Yeah.
So, you can't really be too harsh on him. On to your point though about Milan, I think it's a little bit of both. I think obviously we'll come on to I guess the year after, but they lose the Dutch players. Van Basten, we've mentioned, Hulik goes, Rijkaard goes. They don't replace them in a way that you would expect. I guess it's Savicevic, Boban, all those guys sort of coming in. So they lose that star power for me. They didn't exactly replace them with guaranteed goals. So maybe there is, well, Van Basten's gone. That's obviously going to leave a huge hole, but we've lost basically our 3 controllers, if you like, in midfield and in attack there. They also bring in Desai that next summer and put him in midfield. So I think it's that they're moving to a conservative approach. We can debate whether they're moving there because Van Basten isn't there anymore. But I do think it's Capello's conservatism. Like we said, he evolves a lot more than I think he's maybe given credit for. You look at anywhere he goes, and he's one of these guys like Ancelotti who will go in and give me a bunch of players, and I will shape them. I'll shape them into a team. It might be completely different. I think he moves to a 4-3-3 at points before he leaves Milan, and certainly the same at Madrid. So his evolution, I think, is going to be really interesting throughout this as well, because he's a system guy. He's a guy who give me the players and I'll mould them into something. Now we don't know why they didn't have as much proven quality coming in that summer in the sort of attacking 3 or the attacking third of the pitch. But what we do know is the best defence in the world. Maybe the best defence ever. So I think you're just looking at it as a pragmatist like he is, and you're thinking, I've got Maldini, and we'll come on to Maldini in this season is careering forwards, hitting the byline and putting the ball into the box. That goes the next summer after, and for me, and he becomes the best 1v1 defender that I've probably seen in my life. And that there, so there is a general shift to conservatism. But whether or not it was just because of Van Basten, we'll never know.
Do you know who's a great example of this? Sorry, do you know who's a great example of this? Donadoni. Donadoni becomes one of the finest defensive wingers.
He's like a James Milner of his time.
Yes, that's a brilliant comparison, right? Donadoni, who, when you watch him at sort of Italian 90 or whatever, was a flying winger, suddenly is a lot more concerned with what he's doing at the back. I think that when Van Basten went, Martin, he became obsessed with controlling a game. And I don't think you mentioned there, he said Van Basten was the best that he had. I think then he felt, I don't want to be in a position where if I lose this quicksilver player, I'm then, because if you've got the best, it doesn't matter who else you've got, you're going to drop down a level. So I think he became much more, I will have a system that means we will win these matches. I won't be reliant on the availability of one player. And I think he became much more systemic as a coach, where it was entire. Now, by the way, if you or I had access to a defence like he had access to, I'd fucking play it from there. But I think he just became very reluctant to be as reliant. Adam also mentioned there, the players he brought in are all fine players, but they weren't Hullet, Van Basten and Rijkaard. And I think he thought, I don't want to be in a position where I need to have this. And we need to be absolutely reliant on having these golden players. If we don't have them, this team will still be able to win. And what then it becomes is this ruthless, efficient, cold, 1-0 winning side. Doesn't lose goals, doesn't score many, and their games became intensely boring. And with it jumping a year ahead, that's almost what made that 94 Cup final just so incredible, because it was so, they can do that too still. Yeah, it felt like it.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write 1 million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
They spent a lot of money in Lentini as well from Torino that season, and then a dreadful accident, I think, meant that he was out for that was a world record. I'm sure it was like 13 million or something pounds, which
13 and a half, aye.
Yeah, that stage is just
did they break it twice? Was Papan, did they break it with Papan and then Lentini right afterwards?
They broke it with Papan and then, but 13.5 million, and at the time it was just extraordinary. And then he damn near lost his foot in that accident. I mean, it was that bad that they thought he was gonna. I think he was out for, what was it, 30 months? He was out for after it. It was just.
You used to get Championship Manager Italia on the Amiga.
Yes.
You looked at the Milan squad and Lentini out for 25 months. We'll talk a bit more about that Milan system and team when Adam kind of breaks down the final next week. Game 5, we have to talk about the shenanigans. We have to talk about the fix and the dirty aspect of this Champions League. Again, James Dixon's book is brilliant. It sets out 4 main complaints about Marseille potentially cheating in the Champions League, as they, of course, were proven to have done in Ligue 1. First of all was the Hateley bribe, or the referee bribe against Bruges, but as David's mentioned, you can't do that in European football. He was stupid to do that. We got into great detail and dominant about that. Bribing Siska to throw the 6-0 game in match day 4, but that's in France. They had drawn, not in Russia, it was in Germany, I think, in Berlin. That was the trickier tie. You probably wanted, if you're going to bribe a team to throw a game, that's probably the one. Marseille were always going to beat Siska at home. And then incentivising the Siska players against Rangers, and they were incentivised and they were excellent, but that's not match fixing. Getting players to play well is literally the point of football, and Rangers obviously didn't do the job that night. Where there's always been a bit of intrigue, there's the other issue, which again we speak about in Dominant quite a lot, where Tapi at half-time in the Velodrome game against Rangers goes into the referee's office and asks, is there anything we can do for you? And the referee pushes him out, shushes him out. Rangers know that, UEFA or the referees know that, but no one makes a big deal about it. And if they had, who knows what would happen. In terms of on the pitch stuff, the final game against Bruges has always been a question, and that's why I want to pick it as game number 5 tonight. Bruges 0, Marseille 1. The impact, Richard Goff had a header in the first minute at Ibrox, which was saved, and the place is going bananas. Rangers are on the front foot, and the air disappeared after news from Belgium just filters through on the radio, as it was then. Alan Boxic scores a goal. Now, it's a great finish. He's a brilliant player. But there's a Bruges player who tries twice to fuck that up. He misjudges a header, which is quite remarkable. He gets the ball back and then just passes it into the path of the Marseille. But it's an almost inexplicable pass after 2 minutes. The goalkeeping reaction, some of the kind of theatrics in this game with Bruges players once they've done things wrong are hilarious. I don't know if anyone's seen the clip. I think it's in Bristol, where the police, there's a news report about a burger van that's been done for selling cocaine or putting cocaine under burgers and or packages or whatever. And they're speaking to some guy, you know, this has been going on, and his performance is Oscar worthy. Just like, what? Cocaine? I've never heard of this in my life. I didn't know that. The Bruges goalkeeper is on a par with this chap after that first goal. Now, Marseille could have had 3 or 4. I think that would work quite a lot. The defending is not quite touch tight, shall we say. Lorenzo Stallings has scored a nice goal against Rangers at Ibrox. Is not quite clean through, but he gets ahead of Bowley, I think, and the wildest strike you've ever seen, well high and wide. It's so hard to back project, David, on these kind of things. There's no question that Marseille were willing to do anything that season. There's almost certainly had a bit of mischief somewhere along the path here. I think this is probably the most realistic and the most probable. Didn't really matter if Rangers didn't do their job, but obviously if Bruges were trying, they could have got a win, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, this is, as you say, of all the potentials, this I think is the most egregious. The opening goal is inexplicable, as you say, from decent footballers to make those mistakes, to make 2 of them. And it's hard to view this through any other prism than what we know about Marseille. So we're not coming at this unfairly. This is, they have done in the past. What I think was remarkable was the way that nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear it at the time. And I think football in general is like that. There are things that exist in football that I think we are happier not knowing about. And I sometimes feel when things come out like this, in Italy, there'll be a match fixing scandal. It feels like sort of every 5 years. I think they just sort of need to do it. It almost clears the pipes a little bit. But people almost react in an angry way because they're forced to confront this. I think down the line, we're going to come into this with doping at some point, which has clearly been going on in football for decades. But nobody wants to hear it. We don't like to believe that our game is sullied in this way. And UEFA, who had this wonderful, exciting thing, you see earlier in the season as well, with an English club and a German club, you mentioned it right at the start, that should never have been a replay. That should never, ever have been a one-off, right, fine, well, they should have been out on their arse. So at the time, they're not going to investigate too highly, as it was Rangers who'd suffered. And then Rangers made it even more difficult. Had we won, I think you're right, we would have had a legitimate case, but we hadn't. So therefore, they could say, well, it doesn't matter anyway, does it? But yeah, I do urge people, go and watch this goal. It is ludicrous. And then the keeper doth protest too much, doesn't he? And again, there are 22 men on that field. You don't need 22 of them to be involved in this. You don't need 22 of them to know this. It only takes a couple. And I think that if I was pointing the finger, I'd be pointing at the goalkeeper is the hammiest actor I've ever seen since Gerard Kelly in City Lights. And
classic reference.
Thank you. I thought you might enjoy that one, Willie Melvin. And the defender. I mean, these are for a guy his level.
Brian O'Neill didn't give the game away. Maybe just a bad night.
But he didn't do it. Brian O'Neill didn't do it twice in the same move.
I know.
He done it once.
James Dixon, I urge anyone who hasn't read James Dixon's book to go and read it. It's superb, and I agree with pretty much just everything. Where I disagree is where he says, "Well, it doesn't matter because Rangers drew 0-0." Well, no, to do it matters. To have been involved in even asking the question matters, even if it wasn't accepted. That's a kind of.
That's what I mean about the excuse.
Traditionalist, but that's a kind of red line.
If you must, yeah. But that's exactly it. It's that it gives people who don't want to investigate an out. But the fact of the matter is you're absolutely right, because had that game is affected, and again we see it a lot more now with the simultaneous matches, that if the Belgian side score one, then Ibrox lights up again, and it does matter. And anyway, it just does matter. The competition has to have integrity, but what the competition had been was a roaring success for UEFA. It had been everything they dreamed of and had opened up these new vistas to them. They were not going to have it sullied unless they absolutely had to.
I've got no doubt that we would have...
How did this murkiness affect assessing a team as good as that? I know you kind of touched on it earlier, but one thing I would say, and I've read this so often in Rangers books, no less, Marseille were not stripped of their title. They were never stripped of their title. It's still theirs. Stripped of the league championship, but never this. But they might as well have been, because there's a massive mark next to this season.
Yeah, and it does, like I said at the start, it does taint it a little bit when you're watching it. It feels like most of the blame, if that's the right word, gets pinned on the fullback. I think is it Adderley? It feels like he gets most of the I'll approach the Valenciennes players, I'll approach this player, I'll approach that player. The manager isn't aware of it. It doesn't feel like, certainly for me at that age, you guys will be a bit older, but it doesn't feel like guys like Boksic or Deschamps or Desailly really get tainted with that moving forwards. It was a very strange thing. It was Tapie that did it, and the manager didn't even know about it, and yeah.
But then, Adam, I don't think that this team gets much thought or respect. And the players you've mentioned there, the legendary stuff people don't talk about their Marseille days. People talk about Deschamps at Juventus or Desailly at Milan and at Chelsea. It's what they did after it. And I think that there is a general acceptance in football, because it never really was investigated. As Martin says, they weren't even stripped of it. But even in France, if you... Marseille, when Marseille play PSG or Lyon or whatever in these big games, there'll generally be banners up about cheats, dishonest. Yeah. I think it has stained them as a club, but this was a sensational team. And it is just, when people are going through the classic teams, they'll mention that Barca team from this era. They'll mention that Milan team from this era. So it's not the era They'll even mention the Red Star team from this era. It's not the era, it's them. I would describe Marseille then, it's like a cave that a monster used to live in. And just because the monster isn't there anymore doesn't necessarily mean you want to visit the cave. And I think that there's an element of that with them. I think there's just a stink around them, which is probably unfair because I do think the majority of the players probably didn't know and will feel that it cheapened their achievement. But even Boksic, when people talk about Boksic, they talk about Serie A Boksic. They don't an international Boksic. They don't talk about a European Cup winning centre forward.
No, definitely. And this is the thing. I think that when I went back, this is the most I've watched this team, obviously. And you almost wanted them to be shit. Like you wanted them to be completely fueled by. There's chat about performance enhancing drugs and bribes and stuff, so you kind of wanted them to be shit, so it was obvious, but it's just not there. They're one of the best teams.
They're really good.
In Europe, I know, which is for me that makes it all the more frustrating because you kind of want it. And it's just
Martin said it perfectly. It's Nixonian. It's absolute.
It's a tragedy that it was completely unnecessary. The Romanian coach at the time, Cornel Dinu, has said that he was approached to act as an intermediary between Marseille and there was a Romanian referee that night against Bruges. Told him that Tapi had said through Goethals, who was the Marseille manager, that the Belgians would not be causing us any trouble. Goethals has already been done for match fixing. He used to coach Standard Liège way back in the day. He'd worked with the then Bruges coach Hugo Broos when they were at Anderlecht together. There's a lot going on. David mentioned we'll get to some doping further on in the series. Well, let's do it now. Jacques Adeli, the guy who was the touch paper for the whole affair, said the only time I agreed to take a doping product was the 1993 Champions League final. In all the clubs I played in, I saw some doping going on, but this was the only time I accepted. We all took a series of injections and I felt different during the game as my physique responded differently under strain. The only player who refused to take part was Rudi Voller. Tony Cascarino, of course, comedy Celtic striker of the early 90s, would later join Marseille. He said it was always before the match. We received an injection in the lower back. I was not quite sure what it was, but as everyone told me, it was good, and I felt great after every injection. I accepted.
Oh, that's fine then.
That's fine.
That was great.
That it was legal, though. In reality, I'm 99% sure it wasn't. Marseille, almost certainly doping in the final, which they won 1-0. Adam Basil Boli flicked head. I know you're going to go into the game itself next week in a bit more depth, so let's kind of save that. But Bowley was involved, I think, in something possibly a wee bit more important, a tackle on Marco van Basten that ended his career. Effectively, Van Basten was rushed back at the end of this season. Again, I want to get into that next week with you because that is a sentimental move by Capello to play him. He shouldn't really been anywhere near this final, I don't think, but he was. Bowley ended him. And what the 90s would see, David's already kind of mentioned it, eventually kind of known as the Van Basten law. The tackle from behind was outlawed. Both the 94 World Cup, it would receive kind of stricter attention, and then finally by France 98, it was a straight red. We're going to talk about the pass back next week as well, but these are law changes for telly. These are law changes for the product. These are law changes to make this game more attractive and more beautiful and more aesthetically pleasing and ensure that the ball players, the geniuses, take centre stage rather than some of the players who maybe were cult heroes through the 70s and 80s.
Which is really ironic when, if I was to say, I'm sure you guys know, but who was one of the biggest opposers as a manager to the back pass rule coming in? Johan Cruyff said, what is this all about? This is basically what people say about Arsene Wenger now. This is people sitting there who have never played football that want to just change things for the sake of it, which when you think about how beneficial that rule has been for teams like Johan Cruyff's team, for the Dutch players, it's ridiculous.
Shut down a game, mate, for a defensive side. See if you went one up. The pass back rule was Adam. Martin, you remember that Arsenal, the 1-0 to the Arsenal side in 1991. if they went 1-0 up early, nobody saw the ball apart from Tony Adams, David Seaman, and Steve Bold. So watching the games back now is so bizarre to someone like me who actually grew up with it so normally. But to see it now, even I go, wow. It's kind of like we used to smoke in restaurants, It's like, how the hell, why wasn't this stopped sooner? It seems so alien. But you're absolutely right. I didn't know actually that Cruyff, that's a new thing you've taught me tonight, because I didn't know that. And I think it goes back to the kind of Harrigan-esque, we should still be playing with jumpers and no crossbars, and any change is a bad change. But I don't think it's a bad thing to make it a wee bit more exciting a sport. I think it is telling that it came under Platini, who'd been kicked from one side of the part to the other. And I think his thing was that defenders should improve at defending rather than being able to kick players out of games. If anyone has seen, of course, the Goycochea, Diego Maradona, the Butcher of Bilbao, that can't be a tactic, can it? But it's not American football.
That's an extreme. But the tackle from behind was common.
It was legal.
It was sneaky, and it was every week. And
I'll leave one on him early.
Yeah,
that's what that was.
It was less violent, less obscene than the Goycochea thing. Just to be clear, the Platini's influence was important in the 90s. He wasn't yet UEFA president or anything else. By that point, it was still some of the old lads, old Lennart Johansson and Wow Havelange and all those chaps. But it would make a difference to what the game ended up at the end of the 1990s. Marseille, champions of Europe, it would very quickly turn into disgrace. How that game took place, we will discuss more next week, as well as some other bits and pieces. Thank you, David.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
It is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.